like all of us, I've been watching the horrors unfold in Gaza. A million people have been rendered homeless. Tens of thousands of women and children have been killed. Families have been wiped off the planet. It is absolutely tragic and one of the worst humanitarian crises in modern times. And I reached out to Random Acts to see if there was anything that we could do, and I actually did this through the Random Acts Act program, which is something that is open to all of us. So if you have a seed of inspiration of something that you want to do, you can actually just go onto the Random Acts website and follow the very simple forms there to apply for an act and get it funded and do something positive in the world. Random Acts helped get me in touch with an organization called INARA, and INARA is providing aid to Gazan refugees, and we are partnering with them on this little project to help children and families who have been displaced in Gaza and have made it across the border into Egypt and Turkey. And I spoke with Arwa Damon, who was a journalist and is now a writer and humanitarian who runs, who founded INARA. And we began to scratch the surface. So what I'm sharing with you here is the conversation that I had with her, and I'm also offering the invitation to think about what act you might spearhead in the world. This is not obviously just something that is earmarked for Gaza or even humanitarian crisis areas, but something that you might think of that you can do in your community or elsewhere. So give it a listen and give it a think. Thanks.
Well, thanks for talking to me from all the way across the Atlantic. You are Arwa Damon. Hi, nice to talk to you. I'm saying your name out loud so that other people who might be watching this know who you are. You are a CNN correspondent as well as being the founder of INARA.
Former correspondent.
Former CNN. Okay, good. See, now I'm getting my facts straight. Can you tell me a little bit about the genesis of INARA? INARA is International Aid and Relief and Assistance. Is the International Network for Aid, Relief, and Assistance. Is that right?
Yeah, but also okay. INARA in Arabic means ray of light.
Ah, lovely. Okay. Can you talk about what went into founding the organization?
Yeah, so I was with CNN for 17 years. I just left them in June of 2022 to work on an independent documentary and kind of explore different ways of storytelling. But, you know, if we really look back at how the idea for INARA first kind of ingrained itself in my head, it does definitely go back to my years at CNN. In fact, back to, I think it was 2007 or 2006, and I was based in Iraq at the time. And we ended up doing the story on this little boy named Yusuf. Yusuf's father had gone ministry to ministry, aid organization to aid organization, looking for help for his little boy, because Yusuf, who was just 5 years old at the time, was standing in front of his house when masked men came up to him, poured gasoline on his head, and set him on fire. And when Yusuf's father brought him into the CNN office, I just remember watching him in the kitchen, and he was trying to eat rice, but his face was this hardened mask of rivers of scar tissue, and he couldn't open his mouth. So he would just take a few grains of rice and kind of shove them in between his lips like that. At the time, obviously, you know, people were sick of the Iraq story. No one wanted to hear about it. There was a lot of viewer apathy, and we told Yusuf's dad that, you know, all we can do is tell your son's story. And to be honest, I wasn't really all that optimistic about the response that it would get. And I have to say, I have never been happier to be wrong, because it exploded. And, you know, viewers from around the world wanted to help this little boy. And long story short is he and his family ended up going to Los Angeles. He got the treatment that he needed, and he changed from being this, you know, sullen, angry, very withdrawn and isolated child because of the injuries that he had sustained, to being able to grow and thrive and go to school and regain agency over his own life, right? Like seeing a future for himself beyond the injury and beyond the horrors of his past. You know, and he right now is an adult. He's a young father. He's working out in California, managing a restaurant. And so if you fast forward from there, you know, the use of story to 2012, I was very deeply entrenched in covering Syria. And that was really hard, I think, for all of us in the press corps, because it was the most documented at that point in time, you know, war of our time. And yet, despite all the reporting, despite all this extraordinary bravery by the activists, you know, the needle wasn't shifting from what we could all see as being the worst case scenario unfold. And I was in a very, very dark place. And I had this like suffocating need to do more. And then I was remembering back to Yusuf's story and how, you know, you can bring together all these different entities. You can bring together the medical organization that can help, with the people who want to help, with the children who need help. And that's kind of where it all, you know, emerged from, with this heavy focus on, you know, children who aren't able to access medical and mental health assistance.
I think it's such a, I think we have this idea that journalists are supposed to go into a place, document the worst situations that are happening in the world, and then just let it be, not interfere, not get involved. And of course, that is such a strange mandate that is, I think, sometimes dictated from on high, but also doesn't speak to our better selves. And I love seeing that you, like, you know, obviously you kept a separation between your work as a journalist and the work that you were doing with INARA in nonprofit relief. But I work with a photojournalist. I don't know if you happen to have crossed paths with him over the years, Giles Dooley, who runs a nonprofit called Legacy of War. He's based in the UK, but he had a very similar story. He was going to all of these far-flung places around the world, including Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and documenting these horrible stories. And then to his chagrin, seeing that he would come back two years later and the same family was in dire circumstances that, you know, he had taken the photos of and circulated around the world, was still in the same situation, and which is a little bit different from your story. And he realized, oh, I think I need to start actually shepherding the process of providing some relief here. And you know, we have similar stories of like Syrian refugee families in Lebanon who, you know, literally that 12-year-old girl in the family was trying to kill herself so there'd be enough food for her siblings, and now she's in med school. And it's just this amazing journey, and it's really wonderful to see that you're doing that work in the world right now. For people who are watching this, Random Acts has just sent INARA $10,000 to help with relief for Gazans on the Egyptian border. And I was wondering if you could tell me about how that money is being spent, and also about your understanding of how things are unfolding there. I know that's a very broad question.
Yeah, so things are not unfolding well at all. And just when we think it can't get worse, it does. You know, but that being said, you know, that's where you kind of double down in the space where you can actually do something. So with the funding that we've gotten from Random Acts, we're looking at and trying to pinpoint the most desperate of the many desperate families that are there, because there are thousands of Gazans who are currently stuck in Egypt for various different reasons. And what many people don't realize is that they don't have the funding, they don't have the resources, they don't have the ability to find themselves proper housing, to feed themselves. Those who fled, for example, because They were the guardian of someone who was injured. They fled with just the clothes on their backs. They don't even have a spare change of underwear.
Mhm.
Have no way to actually make money or get funding. And there are actually very few organizations that are specifically looking at this in Egypt, which is why we started looking at it. And it goes back to our whole sort of objective of trying to fill in the gaps, which in an emergency situation are obviously not just confined to medical and mental health. And so with this initial funding, we're hoping to be able to, provide safe shelter, food, and basic provisions. You have to, when you leave with nothing, I mean, it's literally with nothing. And it's quite interesting, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, but also quite poignant when you ask people, what they need. And in some cases, obviously it's the change of underwear, it's the comfy sweatpants because, they're going to be in the hospital for 6 weeks as the guardian of this child. Because oftentimes also it's just a relative that leaves with the child, not even the parents. And then they ask for, they want shampoo, they want conditioner, they want deodorant, they want these little things that are going to allow themselves to feel like, I guess, allow themselves to feel the way they used to feel before October 7th, or as close to that as possible, even though so much has been lost that is never going to be coming back. And,
Mhm.
Going back to what you were saying before, I think, perhaps people out there don't realize what a little bit does to a person in need. And it's not so much the sum or what is provided as it is that someone is there looking out for them and providing for them and actually asking them that question of, what do you need and how can we help? It has such a profound impact on someone's psyche.
Yeah, it's like offering a shred of dignity in the least dignified possible situation. There are so many children who have been killed and so many more children who have been injured in Gaza in the last 3 months. I can't, to my memory, I don't remember a conflict where so many children proportionately were impacted as this. I don't know if there's an analog in modern history.
No, not in my lifetime. Not in anyone who has worked in, the journalism or the humanitarian spaces I have for the last 20 years. And look, I've been to Afghanistan. I spent, over a decade in Iraq. I did all of the big battles in Iraq. I was in Fallujah in 2004. People might have heard, the generals analyzing what's happening there, comparing it to Fallujah or comparing it to Mosul in 2016, which I covered very extensively on the ground as well. This does not compare. This doesn't even come close to comparing. When you look at the volume, the intensity of the bombing, and then the size of the bombs that are being dropped inside this tiny little, highly densely populated, ever shrinking space, no, there is no comparison. There is also no comparison when we look at this from the humanitarian perspective, because never has there been a conflict where getting aid to the civilian population has been so challenging, at the point where the civilian population has been able to move into safe space. And I put this in, those cheesy little air quotes, because obviously nowhere in Gaza is safe. But even if we look at Mosul, which is the closest comparison, if someone, wants to do that, Mosul, remember, Iraq's second largest city, overtaken by ISIS, etc. Massive offensive to go in there, lasted about 18 months, fraction of the death toll that we're seeing out of Gaza right now. And even there, so when the offensive started and the troops went in, the civilians, if they survived that, could flee to a safe space where they were able to receive shelter, food, water, and medical treatment. That dynamic doesn't exist in Gaza. The other big challenge is that what's known as deconfliction doesn't work inside Gaza. So deconfliction is basically when humanitarian actors speak with militaries and or armed actors to try to establish safe spaces, but also, perhaps more importantly, to try to establish routes that can be secured to ensure the delivery of aid. This doesn't exist. This system is just, it's collapsed if it was ever there at all. So you have this added challenge of, one, aid trickles in, And then two, once it gets in, its distribution over the space of the population that it needs to reach to, it can't happen.
Presumably, roads, bridges, all of the infrastructure is also destroyed throughout Gaza. More than 60%, I believe, of homes have now been destroyed in the entire region of Gaza. That's like total destruction. That's everyone.
Yeah, that's buildings that are flat, that, the whole thing needs to get built back up. And then also, you may have heard, and people listening may have heard, about how entire families are just getting sort of wiped off the registrar, and wondering how it is that that happens. Well, this is a very traditional thing, in many Middle Eastern cultures, right? And I've been to Gaza a bunch of times as well during previous bombardments. But anyway, so there too is quite a tradition where, families end up sort of building on top, like floors, as each generation is born, and then the whole family lives together in a building. And so when that building is hit, that's how you end up with, entire families being wiped off the registrar, or the sole surviving child, who now has that horrible new terminology attached to it, which is wounded child, no surviving family, that doctors were talking about at the onset of all of this. And then to add to everything, just to give a bit of an idea of just how dire the situation is right now. So, around 100%, close to 100% of injuries, wounds are infected. There is no capacity to keep wounds to a clean enough level to allow for them to properly heal. I spoke to a man in Gaza whose wife was in the hospital. She did not have a bandage change for 9 days. And when they finally took her bandages off, there were maggots.
Oh my God.
I have spoken to a man.
That's like Civil War stuff. That's unthinkable.
It's not, I mean, I've spoken to, Gazans who, this man who came out and made it to Istanbul. He is with his brothers, 3 triplets who are 5 years old. His brothers, so basically their parents are dead, their grandparents are dead. His wife and child are getting treated in the UAE. One other surviving family member, a woman, is with 2 other surviving kids in Doha. They're completely split apart. They have no idea how they're ever going to get back together, if they're going to be able to. Meanwhile, to go back to the situation in Gaza, aside from the issue with, wound infections and the fact that the, medical system has basically collapsed, you also have a 2,000% increase in diarrhea in children under the age of 5, which, as people may or may not know, diarrhea is globally
potentially
speaking
lethal at that age.
Exactly, because you dehydrate. So you have a 2,000% increase in diarrhea cases, risk of dehydration in a place where you can't get enough clean potable water, not to mention that it's 600 people per toilet. So if your kid has diarrhea and needs to go, you're probably not making it to the bathroom, and you probably can't clean them off properly. Oh, and if diarrhea weren't bad enough, now there's also hepatitis A, which I've had and is horrendous. I mean, it's just...
It's been such a challenging issue for Americans to talk about, because there's widely this perception that if you're advocating for the Palestinian cause, that you're somehow supporting Hamas and the terrorist attacks that they perpetrated at the onset of this conflict, or that it's somehow anti-Semitic or anti-Israeli or anti-Israel to support the Palestinian plight. But this is such an atrocity, what's happening, and it is so disproportionate to what Hamas perpetrated against Israel, and the fact that there are more than 10,000 children who have been killed in this conflict is absolutely unforgivable. So I think it's really important for people in the U.S. particularly to understand, and I'm speaking of the U.S. because I know that the U.S. is such a strong ally of Israel, and our government largely funds Israel's military. So we are, in some very important ways, complicit in this. And the voices of Americans, American citizens really need to speak out to their politicians and let them know that we support Israel's right to exist. We are absolutely not anti-Semitic, but we also believe that the Palestinians have a right to exist, and that Palestinian children have a right to exist, and that any action that results in the death of 10,000 children is the wrong action. It's such a simple calculus from my vantage point. And it's amazing to see the attention span that you mentioned before. You know, people had grown tired of hearing about Iraq in the news, and it doesn't take long. Like after 3 months already, the Gaza story is dissipating in the news, and people are moving on to Donald Trump and his trials, and other things are distracting us. But children are continuing to be annihilated in Gaza. Whole communities are being wiped out, and we need to keep applying pressure, because the only thing that can stop this is leadership at the top making different decisions. Can what I would love to do is furnish anyone who's watching this with a link to your website so people can donate additionally. Random Acts has made a small donation, but I would love to encourage other people to make a donation. I will make a donation. But I also would love to ask you just one final question, which is what do you think citizens of the world can or should do at this point, other than trying to stay as informed as possible?
I think that part is very important, and not to let what's happening slip out of the conversation or, the global psyche. Look, I understand that, it's hard to look at the pictures, and I understand that, it can be suffocating to a certain degree. I do get all of that. But I also firmly believe that those of us who are privileged enough to have, a bed and a roof over our heads, and who are able to, hug the people who we love, and pretty much know that we're going to be able to hug them when we choose to do so, need to recognize that we have a lot more that we can do in our power to help those that do not have that very basic privilege. And when you do something small, even if it's, reaching out to people in your community who you think might need to be, more educated or more aware, or to have a conversation with, then go ahead and do that. If there's something that you can do in your community, to help those, go out and do that. If you can donate, please do donate, especially now that, there's all the talk with, UNRWA losing its funding and everything. That's going to mean that, organizations like ours might have an even bigger and tougher task ahead. And I also think that, we should never underestimate what for us might seem small, for somebody else is huge. It can be life-changing. It can actually be a life-changing moment for them. And there's beauty, in being involved in that. And, if we want the world to be better, I think we need to start with bettering ourselves.
I agree 100%. Well, thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing. And yeah, it sounds really tough, but glad that you're in there doing it, and happy that a few of us can help support.
And we appreciate that so much. Like it means so much. It really does. And it does really, really help. So no, don't thank me. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Nice talking to you.